This episode is brought to you by Pure Astrology Reading Cards. For more information, check out the link in the show notes. Welcome to the Starzology Astrology Podcast. I'm your host, Alison Price, and I'm here again with my good friend and co-host, Arwynne O'Neill.
Hello, Alison. It's great to be here.
So nice for you to join me again. Now, in this episode, we're going to be doing some book reviews, but it's particular types of books, relationship books.
Yes.
So this is your love, your romance,
chart comparison,
the whole thing.
All of it. Because
this is a hot topic.
Yeah. I dare say it is the number one topic. It is the topic that got me into astrology as a budding, tender age of however.
A tender age, yes.
I mean, I think I was honestly 12 when I started.
Really?
When I got love signs from a used bookstore in Seattle. And that was the gateway drug.
The gateway book.
Yeah. And I still have it. Not the same copy, of course, but...
No, they don't last, do they?
No.
So what we're going to do is we're going to be bringing you 5 of each of our very favorite relationship books because relationship astrology is a big topic and most clients come with this question. Yeah. And if you're a practicing astrologer, you'll know that and you need to be always ready. No matter what they tell you they've come to the consultation for, they will always ask you about their love life.
Yeah.
Even if they've come for a business consultation or they want to know about the health or something, this is what I call the doorknob consultation. Because as they're going out the door, they've got the handle on the doorknob, they turn to you and they say, do you think I'll find true love this year? And really, you have to be prepared because they're going to ask the question. So always check for a relationship.
Amazing.
I know, it's true.
Yeah.
Did I tell you when I was giving a talk in...
about the 90-year-old...
Yeah, the 97-year-old lady.
97, that's exactly what I was thinking of when you said that.
Yeah, I was giving a talk on astrology and a 97-year-old lady came up to me and she said, it's my birthday today. I said, well, happy birthday. And she hands out her hand and it was like a bag of bones and I shook her hand. And she said, do you think I'm going to find romance? I mean, she was 97. I said, I'm sure. Let's have a look.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. So it's a big topic. It's a human nature topic. We are hardwired to find a mate and pass on the genes. So we're all on this same...
or find a mate and not pass on the genes. Whichever you choose.
But you still want to... Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to start with Arwynne, and Arwynne's going to bring forth her first book on relationships that she's recommending for us.
Yeah, and this is, I'm just going to start off with how difficult it was to narrow down to 5.
To narrow it down to 5.
God. So I have, as we've talked about in the past, I have hundreds of books, most of them about astrology, and they're all in this bookcase, and they're all organized by color. And when I started looking for, what are my top 5 relationship books, I knew what 2 at least would be, and they're obvious. And if you know this podcast, you're probably already muttering under your breath, Arroyo. Is there a forest? But I did not have any clue what the others would be. And when I combed my shelves, I realized in my fervor to collect books over the years, especially at used bookstores where maybe they'll be like $5 or whatever, paperback books, and scooping up a handful of books at a time. I have, and this is maybe due to my Scorpio rising, I have a number of books that are called Sexual Astrology, The Astrology of Sex, Sex Signs.
Oh, say no more, Scorpio rising.
Right, exactly. And I glanced through all of them as I was doing research for this episode, and I realized that most of them are kind of garbage. No offense to anyone who's written one of those books. I found more than 5 books that I heartily agree are important. And I left behind several incredibly good books by very, influential authors. I didn't bring anything by, a number of authors I respect a great deal. But it's so funny how when they're talking about not just love, but sex, I find that authors really get to sort of air out their grievances. I don't know if you've noticed this in astrology books. Sometimes you'll read a book and you're like, oh, you can really see what signs they don't like. And I find that when they're sort of pandering to what we might call like a lower chakra or the lowest common denominator or what they think of as kind of like a baser topic, they really let their claws show sometimes. And one of my least favorite astrology books, and I'm just going to actually, I will throw this one under the bus. It's called Starzology. And it's one of the worst astrology books I've ever read. I do not care if anyone is offended by this. I read part of this book like 12 years ago, and I was so offended by the descriptions that they had. They were so rude and offensive and insulting. And I just thought, what the, really?
Yeah.
And it's because they're writing about sex that they think that they can just talk about people in this really derogatory, like crude, horrible way. And I feel like a lot of people would probably be turned off, no pun intended, from astrology if that was the first book they picked up thinking, ooh, cool, sex, and then they get in and they say, oh, what are they saying about Taurus? Like, what,
Yeah.
And they are offended, they're disgusted, they close the book and they never pick it up again, the topic,
Yeah.
And I was a little more perseverant than that, but I just wanted to get that out there. So if anyone else is just getting into astrology and that was, the gateway topic, maybe pick up a different book, because that does seem to be something that attracts bad writing and bad faith. I've found. But my first book of my 5 is the opposite of that. This is what I'm going to call the modern love signs. Love signs was the gateway. This is Linda Goodman. We don't have any of her books in our collection right now, but this is Mystic Medusa's Sun Signs and Soul Mating. Mystic Medusa has a wonderful blog. She is a great writer. She's in Australia.
Yeah.
She is funny. She is witty. She is charming. She is incredibly erudite and clever. She has a lot of celebrity examples. She talks about fashion. She talks about pop culture. She talks about movies. She talks about music. And she's right on the cutting edge of everything. And when you read this book, like, I defy you not to laugh out loud at every other passage.
Wow.
I found so many, and not just about the relationship parts. There are parts that are about like, and it's very basic. This is the most beginner of all the books that I brought.
Okay.
And it is strictly sun sign. The first half is anyway, and then she goes into, if you have, she goes into some detailed stuff in the second half. But the first half is literally just if you're a Pisces and you are with a Sagittarius or whatever. And so it's very much like love signs, but it is so funny and so irreverent and so insightful. Wow. I really recommend it just for the pure humor. If this is, if you're just starting out collecting and you want to get a relationship.
Just one book?
I mean, it's not in depth, but it gives you so many little insightful tips and tricks. This is the book where she said, gift giving for a Virgo, all they really ever want is books. And I've quoted that to so many people because it's just such a cute little lovely insight, which it's true for me anyway. So Sun Signs and Soul Mating by Mystic Medusa.
Fantastic.
Highly recommended.
That sounds great.
A very basic book, but it's a big book. It's great.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. What's your first?
So the first book I've got is called Synastry, Understanding the Astrology of Relationships by Rod Susskind.
Nice.
So synastry, for those of you who don't know, is when you're comparing two charts against each other, which is one technique in relationship astrology. And I knew Rod Susskind a million years ago because he's a Cape Town astrologer and he used to do the local horoscopes in the papers and what have you. So he was big there. But he's got some very distinct ways of laying it out and approaching synastry because, again, it's an overwhelming topic.
Yeah.
And I particularly like this book. It's it's a paperback, of course, but I don't know when it was printed, but it's one that I do refer to when I'm doing relationship analysis because there's a lot to it. And it's more about what to do as an astrologer rather than if you're Aries and you're with a Pisces. It's not like that. It's more about what you're looking for and how to determine what's important and so on. And he goes through the elements as well. And it takes quite a bit of a deeper dive into it. So I do recommend this book. I like it very much. And so that's a great one. It's Synastry, Understanding the Astrology of Relationships by Rod Susskind.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your next book?
My next book is Sky Mates by Jodie Forrest and Stephen Forrest.
Uh-huh.
And this is, the subtitle is Love, Sex, and Evolutionary Astrology.
Right.
Yeah. And so they go through, and this is obviously...
Is this when there was no marriage, you think?
Yeah, this is from 2001.
Okay.
And they are both excellent writers. We've talked a lot about their books in our previous podcasts. And they go through it's the, the wonderful psychological astrology, the mythological astrology, and the evolutionary, and they give great celebrity examples. They talk about Dustin Hoffman. They talk about Woody Allen, weird. But they also do a lot of cookbook stuff. And then they talk about, what each person's sort of love language is, depending on where they have like Mars and Venus. And then they talk about like, if you have Jupiter in the fourth house, where, Jupiter in the other person's fourth house, and
you see, these are interesting
inter
things.
aspects, and your placement in someone else's, if you have Venus in someone else's 11th house, or like it goes through all of these, very, very detailed. But what does Jupiter mean in a synastry chart? What does it mean, when your Venus is in someone else's?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So it goes through a lot, and it's obviously wonderfully written because they're both excellent writers, and it's very accessible. It's certainly not a beginner book, but it's their language is very accessible. So it's a more like intermediate topic, but put in a very like personable and engaging way.
Sounds great.
Yeah. So that's Skymates.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Mm. So my second book is Planets in Love, Exploring Your Emotional and Sexual Needs by John Townley. Now, this is part of the sequence of the planets in transit and some others we're going to come across. So this is a very interesting book because it's particularly talking about the emotional and sexual drives that we have, and he's exploring these in here. Sorry.
So is that in relationships, or is that in your own chart, or is it both?
Both. So he's actually going through each of all of the planets and talking about what your emotional needs are and what you're looking for in love, which is sometimes different to what you think you're looking for.
Oh, for sure.
So that's a great thing there. It's I don't know. It's not a new book. It's a pretty old book, but it's a bit beaten up. But it's a great one, and it's under the same, as I say, auspices as the Planets in Transit with Rob Hand.
Absolutely, I remember seeing that book in used books, or not in used bookstores. I think I wanted that book for a long time, and I couldn't find it in a used bookstore, and it didn't. Yeah, it just didn't.
Well, why don't I lend it to you, and you can bring it back next time?
Sure.
Yeah, there you go. So that is a great book if you're talking about relationships, and it's more about what are you looking for emotionally to satisfy you with a partner. So it's a deeper kind of dive than just A and B and this and that. Yeah.
I love it.
So that's a great book.
Awesome. Thank you.
So what's your third book then, Arwynne?
Yeah. So I'm just going to take a weird leap to the side here, and I'm going to talk about a book called Cosmic Love by Jan Spiller: Secrets of the Astrology of Intimacy Revealed.
Wow.
Yeah. And she actually wrote a few books in, I think, the mid-2000s.
Oh, yes.
And very, this is from 2008, actually. But, and I was really a fan of her writing, and just really came at it from a really different standpoint. And this book focuses on the nodes.
Oh, how interesting.
Really interesting for me. And it's got a sort of evolutionary feel to it because the nodes are very, about karma and where are you going. And it talks about the relationship needs of people who, let's say you've got Aries North Node, and what are you like in relationships? She has, every chapter begins with like misconceptions that block intimacy for each, for someone who has the North Node in Aries, or complaints of the partners who have North Node in Aries. Oh. And so they'll say they're too needy of my attention and energy, or they don't make their own decisions, or they're manipulative, or, these things, right? And then she talks about like, if your North Node is in someone else's fifth house or vice versa.
Yes.
And how others can help you heal and all this stuff. So it's very sort of deep, psychological astrology, but I love the fact that it's very focused on the nodes. And
that's very interesting.
I went through a huge node phase where that
was... Oh, I think everybody does, right?
Yeah. Don't we all, really?
Well, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I actually really recommend this book. It's just kind of, I think it's kind of a weird one-off, but she definitely had a very thriving career writing a bunch of different astrology books.
Of course.
Yeah, but it's, for me, that's one of the newer ones since it's from 2008. It's like, what? But yeah, she definitely has some really great insights.
Fantastic. That sounds good.
Love.
I'm glad it's different. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you?
Okay, so my third book I'm offering as an example, as a suggestion, as a recommendation, is Robert Hand's Planets in Composite.
Yes.
This is solid.
I had that one too.
This is a solid Bible.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, a midpoint composite chart is where you take the sun from one chart and the sun from the other, and you find the midpoint, and then you create a whole new chart with all the planets. And this is one way to assess relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Did we do an episode on this? I think we did.
We did one comparing our chart.
Oh, that's right. I remember now. So I'll put a link to that as well.
Yeah.
So anyway, so Planet in Composite by Robert Hand is a absolute, you've got to have it on your shelf. It's solid. And it's very different because a planet in composite is not the same as a planet natally or by transit.
Right.
So it has a different way of expressing itself. And the two people whose composite it is have to align themselves with this position.
Yeah, it's the idea that a relationship, it's greater than the sum of its parts, or ideally it will be.
You sound like Spock now, yeah. So it's a very good book. Again, it's aligning with the planets in love and the planets in. It's very simply laid out. There's good solid paragraphs about each combination.
Yeah.
Composite moon, conjunct composite Mercury, and you're interpreting the composite chart.
Yeah. As though it were a person, which it is.
Yes, yes. So this is for the relationship, which is a great thing. And I absolutely, these are the books that get dog-eared, stop breaking up because you've used them so much. But it's very interesting. And I don't think anyone's written a better composite book since. Yeah. I could be mistaken. And anyway.
Why would they bother? I mean, really?
Well, yes. Yeah, I suppose so.
For a while, anyway.
It's one day somebody will, I suppose, but that's what we're going with. So that's Planets in Composite, Analyzing Human Relationships by Robert Hand.
Yeah.
So what's your next book, Arwynne?
Well, this is where we break out the Stephen Arroyo.
Of course.
Yes, take a drink, everyone. This is Person-to-Person Astrology, Energy Factors in Love, Sex, and Compatibility. And this is one of his most recent books. This was published in 2007. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, any of his older books are obviously wonderful relationship astrology books as well. He published some excellent books throughout the years. Mm-hmm. But this is the one where he did hundreds and hundreds of interviews with people about their placements in, moon, sun, Mars, Venus, blah, 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 and also interviewed their partners about what they say about them.
Is it just the personal planets then?
Yes.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But he goes through like Venus in the earth signs, Venus in, the water signs, and then in each of those signs. And then what do the partners of people who have Venus in Capricorn say about living with a Venus in Capricorn person? So it's very in-depth psychology, and
we like that, don't we?
We really do, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a beginner book, but it does have a very cookbook sort of
It looks like it's a solid tome.
It's very solid, yeah. And he, of course, has incredibly solid psychological and consulting astrologer roots. So if you are looking for something that is not just a cookbook where you are just going to read, okay, so my thing is square his, whatever. You want some insight, and you want some, dare I say, empirical, evidence, whatever, anecdotal evidence to back it up and say, oh, wow, this is, because it really does make a difference reading some quotes that a bunch of people have said about their partners, and you could be like, whoa, I feel that. That resonates with me,
Oh, interesting. Yeah. That sounds like a great book. Yeah.
It's a great book. Mm. Yeah. I've quoted it a bunch of times, I think, in this podcast.
I think you may have.
And why wouldn't I?
Well, exactly.
Yeah. So it's your fourth book.
So my fourth book is The Astrology of Human Relationships, Techniques for Guiding and Evaluating Your Personal, Social, and Business Relationships, Francis Sakoyan and Louis S. Acker. So this is an oldie.
Yeah.
Compared to the others, but it's still solid. It's a book I've had previously and had to buy a new one because it fell apart. The only thing I will say about these older books is that the text seems to be minute. Oh, yeah. And, you're struggling to actually read it. Whereas modern printings, they kind of lay things out a bit better. Yeah. But this is your solid stuff, A, Saturn is trine B's Uranus. Yeah. We're all very formal here,
Yeah.
But, again, it's pretty solid stuff. It's coming from, the last century, and but it's got solid stuff. And if you are trying to understand, what does it mean? His moon square my sun.
Yeah.
We don't want to say, well, run,
Yeah. I have that book, and I believe that it's incredibly dog-eared and full of Post-it notes and pencil markings.
Yes. His moon's in my 7th house. What does it mean?
Yeah.
And all of these things. And of course, it's not just love relationships.
Yeah.
When you think about it, it's business relationships as well. And everyone you try to get on with, really.
Oh,
and it's understanding people.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the benefits of astrology, is that it doesn't just help you in your love life, these things.
Yeah.
They help you get through life, really.
Absolutely. And this is why, if any of my friends are listening and they're like, you asked me about my birth information and you never actually gave me any kind of a reading, why? And this is why, because I just want to know, for me, how to get along with you. This is
exactly. And if you've got a boss who's a pain in the neck, you can say, we could do his chart. Don't we all? Yeah. We've all been there, right?
Yeah.
So,
I've even said to some people when I asked for their birth information, don't worry, I'm not going to do your chart. Like,
yes.
No, for me.
Well, your mother-in-law, that's the best. You do your mother-in-law, think, well, I've got no chance, she's going to bury me eventually. And so anyway, this is a great book. It's solid. This is my 2nd copy. And I think it's a great book. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So what's your last book you've got there, Arwynne?
Well, my last book is, and this is a strange one, but I love this book so much. And it is by Richard Idemon, Idemon,
Yep.
Through the Looking Glass.
Oh, yes.
A Search for the Self in the Mirror of Relationships. And it's one of his, he wrote very few books because he lived from 1938 to 1987. He passed away very young. And he did a series of lectures, which is what this book, this is one of those things that was very popular in the 80s and 90s, early 90s. This was published in 1992. A lot of books were published from conferences where they would just have
notes.
Yeah, just basically audience asks this question, here's their answer. Tons of them. Liz Green, Howard Sasportas, tons of them did these books. And they're actually kind of great, especially when you're first learning and you kind of skim them at first. But this one I read from cover to cover. I remember just being like, oh my God, this guy was brilliant.
Yes.
There was just something.
Well, this is before the internet, you see, where we could, now you just put it all on a blog or something, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Oh. And actually there have been some amazing blogs, which I would actually put, right up with Richard as, just wonderfully insightful, little geniuses out there. But it just happens that I have this physical book, and he was very influenced. Like, you can really see that whole 1980s mythical astrology. You can see a lot of Liz Green in his writing.
Right.
There's a lot of mythology. There's a lot of archetypal talk. He talks about the Moon Saturn complex, and there's Oedipus talk and all that stuff.
Yes.
And some generations might find that a little bit less palatable than others. I think it might have been Aaron Sullivan who said, you talk to the baby boomers about the Oedipal complex, and they're like, oh yeah, totally. And then you talk to Gen X about it, and they're like, ew, what are you even talking about?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And of course, millennials would be like, even more so, and et cetera. But it's about archetypes, and there are so many beautiful insights in this book, and it's just a wonderfully insightful.
Would you say it's a beginner's type book? No. So this is more of an advanced relationship. You've got to dig your way up, work your way up to this one.
Yeah. You can skim
I
it.
I know.
You almost wish there were hyperlinks where you could just search, okay, Moon, Pluto. But if you skim it and then you see, audience asks question, does an 8th house moon have the same feeling as a moon in aspect to Pluto? And you're like, what? Does it? And then he goes into this incredibly beautiful description about, Demeter and Pluto and the kidnapping of Demeter's daughter, Persephone, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, wow. Yeah. But, and of course, badass goddesses, this is why
it's working you in, isn't it?
Completely. Yeah. But
it's your type of book.
It really is. And, and there are some wonderful just passages where you find these wonderful human insights that you can't really get from something that's kind of more of a surface cookbooky thing. You kind of have to delve a little deeper if you are interested in that kind of thing. I highly recommend anyone who's
That's
kind of
great. And what was the name again?
It is called Through the Looking Glass.
Perfect. Great.
Yeah. What's your 5th book?
So my 5th and last book is Synastry: Understanding Human Relations Through Astrology, Ronald Davison.
I almost brought that one too.
So this book for me was a turning point.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of you who don't know, the Davison chart is a calculation you can create, and it's really about casting a chart for the midpoint in time between two people.
Yeah. So it's not like a composite, but it's like a composite because you create your own third chart.
So if I was born in 1950 and you were born in 1960, our Davison chart will be set for 1965.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this to me was like mind blowing. And I also like the fact that he wrote this, in the 60s, I believe it is, or the 70s. And the point is that he created this whole new technique called Davison relationship charts, which we now all use.
Yeah.
You can cast them, of course, in Solar Fire and Astro Gold and everything.
Yeah.
And that's what the Davison chart is. And it frequently reflects the midpoint composite, but not always.
Right.
And the bigger the gap between your ages, the more change you will find within this relationship.
Yeah.
Within the actual Davison relationship chart
Yeah.
itself. So if you're born the same year, it's going to look very similar.
Right.
But if you're like years apart, and some of us are, you will get it entirely. We didn't do our Davison, did we? We'll have to look into that next time.
In this book, he talks about synastry, but then he also talks about the Davison chart.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Yeah. So this is the book where, because synastry is different to composite charts or midpoint charts, because synastry is comparing charts, my Mars in your fifth house and your Mars square my whatnot.
It's what the bi-wheel and the comparison of two
charts. So synastry is basically bi-wheels and finding aspects that connect, that my sun is conjoined your Mercury or what have you.
Right. But in the Davison, as well as a composite, you create a whole third chart. That is one single.
The Davison chart.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that's different. Yeah. So, it's, as I say, what got me with this book was the fact that some modern person has created this whole new system that we're all working with. Yeah. And then I think to myself, well, I could have done that, or you could have done that, or and I put it on my students. I said, go forth and work up whatever your theory is and go with it, launch it. Because if you've got some new way of calculating something or other, then put it forward. Let's all benefit from it. Yeah. Don't think it's all been done. That's what I'm trying to say.
And don't think that you just have to create an app of some other stuff that already exists.
Yeah, exactly.
You can actually create your whole new thing. If you have an idea that works, that's the thing I think is why it's lasted, is because it does work.
Yeah.
That's all of astrology, right?
It really is.
We wouldn't still be talking about it if it didn't work.
Yeah. But it's not often you come across someone who's created a new technique in the last 100 years.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas most of the stuff we're going with, like aspects and whatnot, was all worked out 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And all these techniques were. But now and again, you get someone who's come up with some newfangled idea. And why not?
Yeah.
So I always think it's great if you've got a particular area of astrology that interests you, go down that road.
Yeah.
Own your niche, which is how they say it. And so anyway, I love this book because this was an eye-opener for me. I thought, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Totally.
And of course, you can do this with anybody you know, which is a great thing. And we need to do our Davison. We'll definitely pencil that in. And we'll have a session about that because we haven't done it yet. I mean, good heavens, why not?
Absolutely. I remember, it's funny, just because relationships are such a universal thing that people are so fascinated by. I remember when I was very first beginning to study astrology and I was doing everyone's charts and I was printing out like reams and reams of paper and being like, look, listen to this. I'm going to read all about your Venus or whatever. Yeah. And I had love signs. I had a copy of love signs. And I remember I was sitting around with a couple of girlfriends, and this is like literally in like 2000 or maybe even like 1999 or around there. And one of them was like paging through love signs and going, has anyone written something like, this century about whatever in the last like 30 years? And I was like, I don't think so. No. not the same way.
No.
But I mean, this is why we have all these books now. And I do think that we've got a couple of like modern contenders who definitely are picking up the mantle.
Yes. Yeah,
you don't have to go back to the 70s per se, but there are still some, super valuable things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I did think I spoke about this in my last newsletter, what I sent out on Sunday, saying, get whatever your thing is, get on it, own it, go down that road. Don't think it's not for you, because it is.
Yeah.
And that's how I started,
Totally.
So, Arwynne, this has been great. We've gone through our 5 each top books for relationships, love, romance. It's the hot topic. Everyone always asks the question. Yep. As an astrologer, you've really got to dig into these things regardless. And, of course, we're all interested in these things.
Absolutely.
Why you love this one and not that one, or whatever it is.
Or get along in business or friendship or relationships in your family, whatever.
There has to be something. There has to be something. And this is what these relationship books are about. We've spoken about synastry. We've spoken a little about some psychological work as well, which is very interesting too. So the point is, I think there's no one book fits all with this.
No.
You've really got to start with a couple and then keep going.
And as we said earlier, I went off a little bit of a rant about it. But honestly, if you find a book that tells you you shouldn't be with a certain person because of this or that aspect, and it turns you off from that person or from astrology, which is valid, find another book, because it's not about telling you what you can't do. Yeah. That is never, ever the point of astrology. The point of astrology is how can you work with these energies? How can you figure out how to get along with this person or make your business plan work with your personality? Because maybe you're not entrepreneurial. Maybe you don't have a huge, Zuckerbergian drive to dominate the earth with your tech whatever.
Yeah.
But there's still a place for everyone's ideas, and there's still a place for everyone in relationship in some way. You just have to find a way to get along. And that's the point of all of these, is that you'll find nuggets of insight, and you might have to search through a bunch of different books or websites or whatever to find the insights, but you will find ways of kind of going, oh, wow, that's why they're like this, or that's why I'm like this, or that's how I can get along when we fight, and I never knew what to say before because he always storms out, or whatever.
Or the silence for 3 weeks or something.
Exactly. And it's just about finding little ways to make your life work better.
This is it. Well, this is what astrology is, isn't it? It's understanding people and you and yourself and what triggers you and all the rest of it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are afraid, as you say, when people come for a consultation or don't want to come for a consultation, you're afraid you're going to tell me something bad. I think a lot of people get afraid because they read something like, oh, don't be with this guy because he's going to, abuse you or whatever. What an irresponsible bastard that was who wrote that. Yes, how dare you?
Yes.
But there are a lot of people who will just wield the pen like a sword, and it does scare people. And don't be scared. Just read a different book and
move on. Keep going.
Yeah.
There are many books out there. We haven't read them all yet. So and clearly we brought different books to the table today. And interesting is so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to our listeners, if you have found value in this episode, do consider sharing it with anybody who would be interested. Please feel free to email us at starzology@gmail.com, and you can visit our website at starzology.com. Also, below this podcast episode, there are show notes, and there's actually a link there now where you can text Starzology now. We will receive text. We're not necessarily going to respond immediately, but we will receive text from you, which is kind of fun. I don't know. So.
And if you want to support the podcast, you can also do that.
There's a link down there if you feel you want to support the podcast. There's two options there. One is we've got a straight up tip jar, and the other is to do a monthly donation to help support this podcast and keep it going.
Yes.
Yeah, we would appreciate that. Yes. And we do appreciate that. And we do appreciate those who have already done so.
Yes.
So, Arwynne, thank you so much for being here today. And it's been great having you for this session.
Great being here. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the two main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer or someone who's learning astrology or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.